Hi there. I suppose people might ask me, how do I become a Gnostic? This might be the subtitle of this presentation. Um, it's a bit, well, it's a contradiction there because, if you have a mystical experience, then by definition you are a Gnostic. So it's not something that you can attain so much as something that you can receive. But having said that, I suppose there are some things which you can attain through your own efforts, and some things which you receive through the operation of grace or the operation of the Holy Spirit, which is the connection of the divine with the profane, with the other dimension, spiritual dimension to this dimension, and so I've already sort of been over the kind of components of Gnostic life. Meditation, certainly one thing, going into silence. And in that silence, perhaps receiving the voice of the silence, having that speak to you, the silence itself. Contemplation of the Nag Hammadi Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels, drawing inspiration from homilies connected with the Gnostic Gospels as well. Very, very good, very, very good source of inspiration. And you can listen to them over and over, or you can read the Gnostic texts over and over and get different things from them. And that's very, very powerful as well. You can do that with many spiritual texts. In fact, you read them over and you get different things. You listen to a spiritual talk and you get different things from the talk every time. And that's okay. That's part of the course, really. You can also detach yourself from the world. You detach yourself from, of course, I am not my feelings and I am not my thoughts. Because your thoughts and your feelings are created as a result of the experiences of this world. So that's bracketed with detachment from the world, but also not over-involvement in the world, certainly. I don't have a TV, I don't listen to the news, I don't care about the news really too much, except where it sort of literally impacts on my life, on the life of my family. Of course, contemplate or cultivating kindness is another thing on this list. And certainly you should be kind to your neighbour, and Jesus has already defined what neighbour means. It means somebody that you don't know. It means that the person you meet on the road in life who needs your help or requests your help, and you should give it, even though you don't know who they are. The Mahabharata says that that war is defined by people caring more about their own children than children in general. And where that happens, war arises. So it's an amazing concept, that, really. So and Jesus also seemed to imply that that families were not a great idea, that families represent the world and microcosm. And it's not actually a very good idea to have much to do with families, and certainly not to have children and create more families where the world operates in microcosm even more strongly and distracts you from the spiritual path. And he really did mean that as well. So, there's an ascetic part to Christianity, which I think a lot of Christians actually choose to ignore quite a bit, really. There is a detachment, a disengagement from worldly affairs, even within Orthodox Christianity, and even within the ministry of Christ. So, think about that as well. And also, I would include in the list receiving and contemplation on images that arise, and I call them magical images because they're images that are received or are created as a result of development either of magical will or receiving the effects of the will of the divine, which is expressed very often through images, and the meaning of images as well. So I included that in the list of the Gnostic life of attainment. So thinking about what categories of magical images there are, and how they sort of impact on the Gnostic life, if any, or if at all. I thought, if you close your eyes and you just look at the back of your eyelids, you will see a sort of red glow, which of course is the light shining through the various blood capillaries which run all over the back of the eyelid. And you may be able to discern after a few seconds a whole jumble of black and grey images, sometimes golden images, arising from this crimson haze of the back of your eyelids. You could take a sort of snapshot, a memory snapshot, as it were, of this jumble of images, reproduce them as best you can, and then they could be open to interpretation. So that's a way of gaining access to the unconscious by actually focusing on this jumble of random images, which all of them which carry meaning, most of which, of course, will be lost to you or meaningless to you, but they do have a meaning, and maybe get someone else to interpret the images for you. That's kind of a good idea as well, if you can. And so that's one thing. I'm not quite sure what that's got to do with the Gnostic life, really, except that it's probably a good practice to access the unconscious on a regular basis. And on that basis, of course, as you know, I'm not very, very keen on Hermeticism and occultism, because I think people can get completely lost in the various folds and snares of occultism. But certainly there is a technique whereby you can close your eyes and bring to your mind's eye an image, a simple image to start with, and then complex images later when you get good at this, and maintain the image for as long as you possibly can, consciously, by your conscious will. And this, from this exercise, if you get good at it, you can also use the image as a sort of portal or a sort of starting place. You kind of go, if you've got your image there, you can go through your image as if it was a sort of gateway to further images later on. And now these may be somewhat of a jumble of images that you receive, and that takes you back to the situation where you're just receiving a jumble of random images anyway. But again, you can interpret the things that you encounter and experience when you go through your main image, your gateway image, as it were, which you've developed over a long period of time of concentrating on the image and keeping it as stable as you can for as long as you can. And that's a very powerful magical exercise. In fact, some people say that's the magical exercise. And certainly if you're a very visual person and you learn by visual means, that's a very, very powerful magical exercise to develop over years. And there may be two effects of this. One is, very interestingly, that when you close your eyes spontaneously and see this crimson haze of the back of your eyelid, you may find images reveal themselves that you actually have remembered over the years, images that you have focused on in your life consciously, or working with them on a ritual basis, I suppose. And these images will just appear, and they're ones which you have remembered from previous magical exercises. And these are very powerful, because I think that if something happens to you, wells up from the unconscious, and leaves an imprint, an image imprint on the back of your eyelids when you go to sleep or when you're meditating. These are very powerful, and these, it's a bit like consciously waking and looking around the room and consciously taking in what you can see, and the images are happening to you. So the images, it is as if reality is happening to you, because you can see your curtains and your your chairs or whatever. And similarly, these images are happening to you. You're not creating them consciously. You're not fantasizing, or you're not visualizing consciously. They're just things that arise spontaneously as a result of years of working with particular images which are of significance and meaning to you. And I think that this actually is an indication of the receiving of the grace from the divine. And so it refers you to the receiving of images which have originated from the divine. And the divine has used the images that you have contemplated over the years to communicate literal spiritual grace to you. And this will become very significant during your life, and indeed after your life, after your physical life has terminated. And the other thing is that sometimes, as a result of all this contemplation and visualization, you may get completely new images appear to you on the back of your eyelids, but they're not a jumble of images, random images. They are very clear and distinct ones that have an anatomy to them, as it were, that have a structure to them, that have a geometry which is very finely detailed. And again, I like the way that these things happen to you. You're not creating them by your conscious will. They're just happening to you. They're welling up from the unconscious. And again, they could signpost to the fact that you are receiving grace from the divine. And so when you put all this together, when you put all these visualization practices together and visualization results together, together with good cultivation of kindness, together with a detachment from the world, together with contemplation and meditation, contemplation on the Gospels, meditation on the silence that you can achieve through focus and through quietude, then you are preparing, you are creating in your unconscious a rainbow bridge between you and the divine, so that when you die, it'll be much easier for your consciousness, for your mundane consciousness, or some part of it, to cross over from this dimension to the spiritual dimension, as your soul transmigrates from this dimension to the next. And as it migrates, as a sort of carrier wave, as it were, the consciousness that you have acquired as a result of your spiritual practices as a Gnostic will modulate the carrier wave, and so that you can actually take some part of your consciousness that you have now into the divine, and that will enable you to reference experiences that you have there forever and ever, and so you'll be conscious of what it is that that mystics only refer to in vague terms, and you'll be fully conscious of the divine. And I think, and so obviously, what the theory is, the Hermetic theory is the the greater the spiritual life that you lead now, putting together all the components I've described, the better your experience will be in the afterlife, in the divine dimension, in your experience of unity with God. Now, I know that this sort of goes against Orthodox Christianity big time, for various different reasons that I can't go into now because I don't have time. But it is sort of heretical thinking. Well, it's heretical thinking from the point of view of classical orthodoxy in Christianity. Whether it's still that heretical, to think about the effects of leading a spiritual life now in preparation for your life as a unit of consciousness in union with God, I don't know. I think it's sort of all. I think Christianity has gone so individualistic now, and it's gone so creative, I suppose, and there's so many different interpretations, even of the charisma of Christianity, that I'm not sure where all these boundaries end. I think the category between Orthodox Christianity and unorthodox Christianity has blurred to such an extent that a lot of Christians are probably Gnostics without even realizing it. You know, certainly a lot of liberal Christians, liberal Muslims, liberal Jews, for example, that have taken on board many Gnostic principles and contemplations without actually realizing it, and that's okay as well, really. But of course, if you are consciously a Gnostic, I suppose again you have a sort of anchor, whereby you can anchor your consciousness to some kind of framework, whereas other people can't. So again, what I'm really saying is that if you lead the spiritual life, the Gnostic life, and you are open to the divine, you are sort of creating an anchor, you're manufacturing an anchor, as it were, which will anchor you to the divine dimension when you cross over from this dimension to that dimension. And that's possibly could be quite important and quite crucial to your experience of the delights of being one with God.